Shall we continue? Discussion time. Thank you for everyone making it back.
Yeah.
That's why.
Maybe we should break down first talking about the paper in itself, and then talk about the scenarios. Just break it down.
Sure.
So to contact the
what do you mean with scenarios? You meaning to the ones that you referred to already?
Examples, and also additional examples if people have that.
Yeah, sure. I think I have the impression that with respect to your examples, we had quite a bit of discussion already, right? So it has kind of melted into a discussion of serious games more generally. So I'm not sure if there's any follow-up comments or points with respect to the 4 examples presented.
Okay.
Not explicitly.
So, paper in itself.
The paper in itself. So, what's the paper about? Did anyone read the paper? Good. You guys. Oh no, there's some. There was a 2-second delay, so I just took me a while. But in any case, it's pretty good that you, in any case, read the paper. So that's the perfect start for it. But so, what's the paper about? Perhaps you could give us some rundown.
The paper is a summarization of all the research papers regarding serious games. So, what they tried to do, what the writers did, is that they searched for various generic types of very serious games within various databases for research papers, and then tried to, or read through them, found and picked out highlights, or picked out the most interesting ones that had corporate training or training within the scope of the serious game part. Is that? Yeah, I think the method is okay, but again, he might have, or the way his procedure is, might have slipped some interesting things, but also it seems that they found many interesting other papers.
It should be streaming. It's not streaming yet?
I'm not sure. There is just a message on Discord that we got on live yet.
It usually starts with a delay of 1 to 2 minutes because of the streaming processing on the server side. But
just do a refresh again.
It probably would. Okay. So.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Okay. So I think in regard to the methods, we found I think that we also have had a bit of discussion about, and that is, I think both examples point towards gamified e-learning tools, and not directly actual serious games for training. It's more already training tools. Yeah. Just the impression at least. I'm not sure you have a problem with that also, but yeah.
What are the learning? I mean, every time we look at a survey paper, right? Well, we look at, I mean, at least I do it, look at it and then, so what? Right? So it's the ultimate question. So why did I read this thing? What do I take away from it? And that's, what do we take away from this paper? Or what does the author, in this case, only a single author, in fact quite laborious for a single person, take away from, provide us with novel insights that we didn't have before?
Just serious games for training has a long way to go to actually have a real training model. I think that's one key thing to pick up on. Because there's lots of holes to fall into if you don't do it properly and correctly.
What are particular considerations that are put out? It is open to all the entire class. What are particular considerations that are relevant that the author identified as important to consider when devising serious games for the training purpose, corporate training in particular? There were some points. I mean, there was reference to the general attitude of people towards games, right? So and there were some variations of that within the demographics of the potential employees. Do you recall any of those? In fact, it kind of overlaps with the discussion we had last week again on the psychological effects, because Thomas also highlighted certain patterns of demographics with respect to receptiveness of serious games, right? Certain groups are more receptive. Any points here she identified? I believe it's a she.
Well, I'm not sure if it was in this paper, but
Sure, doesn't matter.
I read that, well, again, a new generation that already had experience with games pick up on this very much more quickly. First example of evacuation training presented that. What they also found, or another paper found, that there seemed to be that guys pick more quickly up on aggressive training, so or competitive training, so versus mode or things like that. While females seems to pick up on cooperation and social, but I also seem to find that both pick up on and like to use serious games for training. They found. And also that it seems that females in general seem to pick up on more performance. That was I can see if I can find a quote on it, but yeah.
So that was an important point. One of the other things was also you talked about gender demographics. So it's interesting, right? The more kind of assertive, aggressive approach as opposed to social approach. But it seems like that also applied to a age differentiation, right? Whereas younger players up to mid range were more interested in kind of task-oriented approaches, right? Whereas the way I interpret it from this paper is like solving something specific, like put out the fire, or I don't know, whatever it would be, right? Whereas the social component again is more pronounced in the older community, so in the older demographic, right? So if people get are slightly older employees. So I don't not quite know how that would translate in serious games, but evidently it's reported here. So I found this quite at least noteworthy to figure out what's the reason behind it. Because why would older people be less task driven? I don't retrace that entirely, but perhaps there's some intuitions here.
The one that's forwarded here was with specific numbers was that training for anti-bribery was useful for employees with less than 9 years of experience, but if they have more than 9 years experience with the company, then they benefit from it.
Right, okay.
Probably don't care. But I would guess that
there's two variants, right?
There's an aspect of like, I've been doing this job for 10 years, I know what I'm doing, you don't need to retrain me. Whereas someone new, if you enter into a company and they say, this is how we're going to train you, without really giving you an option, then you're going to take on that training.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So another example, do you want to say that? So another example is that when you have been in a position for a long time, you don't want to be told if you do it bad or not.
Right, it's kind of similar direction as Clara says, right?
Yeah, an example of that is when you have large-scale exercises for the fire crisis management, at least in Norway. Yeah. What I've seen is that the exercise is more of a presentation of how they do stuff. And they create a report, and everybody pat each other on their backs and say, good job, and they learn nothing from it. Well, it's still presented as a training scenario.
Right.
The reason for it is that they don't want, or they evaluate each other like internally. They don't have any outside sources to actually bring to look at how do they do it.
Right.
So the higher up you are in the system, the less training you have, and the less people you listen to get advice. In a way.
Interesting. Okay. So you open two discussion pathways, right? One is that the rigidity of organization may be in conflict with the use of training more generally, right? And the second dimension is cultural aspects, right? So that in certain cultures it's more or less, for explicit or implicit reasons, desirable to have an explicit training, right? So telling someone how to do something, right? So that's a very interesting perspective you could pick up on as well, right? So it's kind of two, they're not quite the same, right? So, but they of course interrelate, so having organizational linking this to the point Clara made, I mean, now giving this whole thing a bit more positive spin, because the way it sounds all is like people don't want to be told anything, and they are inherently learn resistant, and they're just bad anyway. No, but you could also say, well, it could also be that they simply know all that basic stuff that is taught in the serious games, because it's so simple and general, right?
And
so
they already have a social network with the others they work with, so they don't need to get to know more of the other tasks or jobs either.
So exactly, there's that aspect as well, right? That you have become a bit of a lighthouse with your own, with respect to your own discipline, but actually, for special cases, I know whom to call, right? So
But they don't. That's the problem.
Oh, they don't. Okay.
No, they like every. If you look at, for instance, Utøya,
Okay. Right.
They don't have enough training for large scale scenario or large scale accidents.
But there was an exception, right? There was a
that's different to Utøya. You're
No?
talking about not the terror attack. You're talking about the
Utøya, the terror attack.
terror. Okay.
The report from that event says that, or between the lines, it says that they don't have enough training for it to handle it. That's our experience with it also. That yes, they have experience with handling the day-to-day stuff, but the second it escalates above their head or above a certain threshold, they don't really know how to handle it, and it really breaks down.
Yeah, but this was an exceptional event, right? So that was
true.
an eye opener in a way. So if you were to devise a training setting now, it would include it, right?
Yeah. But I also think that you can't really, or you don't really train to succeed or fail. It's a level of success, and you can't really measure the level of success in a good way.
That's a good one.
For instance, like could you manage to put out a fire with less resources? You still manage it, but so there's so much of this in regards to training. You don't really know, or you can't really measure it properly, and that might be a problem that you need to, if you want to use serious game training, you need to actually figure out what is the problem, or what you need to train. Training simulators don't really have that in mind in a way. You figure it out on the way.
Okay, that's the discussion: training simulator versus serious game again, to some extent. Yeah. But I mean, okay, in this slide, it would be quite useful to actually allow, you opened Pandora's box there, to of course look into training metrics, because my intuition is, of course they do exist, right? So they may not be often as overt or explicit, but we had them, for example, some of them may be more at face value looking at the training itself, such as reducing training time. But for example, if you can measure productivity of an employee in response to the training, right? So, or whatever else, or evacuation time is a very hard metric that we exercise through at least once a semester here at NTNU, right? Where we randomly called out, we actually timed as to how fast we can exit the building, right? So, and I presume the punishment for not exceeding a certain threshold would be to do it again.
Exactly.
So that's why we're quite pushy on doing it. But so there are certain metrics, I believe. So it would be worthwhile to figure out, to identify some of those, specific, of course, to disciplines and so on. But it's still, there's another problem. That's probably more decisive. Is the issue of alignment again? What was alignment?
Alignment
Yeah.
between reality and training.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, I mean, we use that from a slightly different perspective, right?
How the game matches the real I think so.
Do you basically motivate the user to do the right thing, right? So you want to motivate behavior change as opposed to just playing the game. So, and that's the same here, right? So how does, even if you have metrics, yeah, you may still be right and say you can't measure, the training outcome because the alignment is not there, right? There may still be metrics in the training simulation, but again, this correspondence may not be established, right? So that's perhaps an interesting avenue to go down and see, and how far alignment is assessed. Meaning, is there not only, training goes faster, that's good, but did you also measure increase in productivity, right? Increase of number of phone calls you can handle, right? Reduction or number of fires you can put out in a given amount of time and so on, right? Number of incidents minimized, right? So those are all metrics that help with training, but also depend on the objective of the training, of course.
That is true.
But it's perhaps worthwhile to see if there's any correspondence. Are there actually firefighter teams that have met a reduction in the casualties or whatever else, right? Or increase in responsiveness or whatever else. So it could still be a worthwhile discussion. Even if you don't find something, say that you don't find something. So just looking at your reports or looking ahead at your reports, because that seems to be an issue. I agree with you, and tricky one. In fact, probably more tricky than in most other of those disciplines we're discussing here, because they're much more rigidly embedded in one discipline, right? In your case, it's all over the place. So you have this cross-disciplinarity problem, I guess, in the training. But even more, that requires you to have this bird's eye view, and what works, what doesn't, and what are issues. And yes, so I don't want to go further, but so some issues are identified here, but I don't think all. So did anyone else come up across something in the paper that was of interest, or wants to continue the discussion? Nothing? Then it was a bad paper.
Yeah, it's more what I don't like about the paper.
Yeah,
I think that's easier. So as you were starting, what can you learn from the paper? And I didn't learn so much. And I think there are three reasons for it. Two are very closely related. But one reason is that they looked at too many different things. So there are too many, not in conclusion, but too many things they discussed, and they don't, which means that they don't go much in detail about each formula. So
like 3 pages of presentations.
yeah, and that's the other part. So those citations are not put in context. So what you would like to see is kind of a mapping study. You say, well, these papers, they talk about these things, this topic is being covered by multiple papers, and now it looks like ad hoc. They say, okay, they talk about this and that, and this and that. So it doesn't seem to, what is the red thread here, and how do we see the field? So they say how many papers they do look at, but they don't provide kind of an overview. What does this paper collectively say? What is it distributed? Where are these tables that show the relationship between the topics and everything? So that's number one. And number two, they just spread around numbers like the 14 hours, 14 days and 14 hours. And they have, for McDonald's, I don't know if you looked at that, for McDonald's they say $30 million savings. Now, and there are two references. In one reference I don't find a number at all. In the other one I find $23 million.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're spreading around, and they don't argue, they don't set it up, and they don't discuss in detail any of the topics. So I don't get much out of this paper.
It's a good point there in that check your sources, because I did try to go in and verify the numbers. And he's quoting all the papers who have been quoting the real source.
Exactly. This is a dangerous business.
Yes.
Very dangerous business.
So I think what you can take out from this report is that when you want to look into serious games, have done a lot of researching, presenting papers for you to read. So while this paper in itself is just a summary of the whole field, you still need to go and look at the other parts you find interesting, or that might give you a better answer.
Yeah, I mean it's not very well done as craftsmanship, and also I was what did I say? I mean they have N 8,880 the abstracts of these studies. So are the 8,880 abstracts or the 8,880 studies? Might be the same thing, but so they read 8,880 ones. I think they filter after this, and they don't say how they filter that. That's what I believe. But I don't believe that she sat and read through 8,880 abstracts and say, this is, I will do that. Sorry?
Yeah, she was just, she was alone. There wasn't anyone to collaborate with.
She's the only author, so yeah, and they identified the 50, 21, and 6, and usually we would like to see that table set up as well.
Yeah.
So there's some really craftsmanship here that's not very good either. So, and language isn't bad, but at the same time, sometimes we're reading it, this doesn't sound too, it's not convincing, because it seemed that they could do a very quick editing and fix some of the language errors. So altogether, it doesn't establish the kind of authority I would like from a paper to be convinced that these results are strong.
Another point also, I completely agree. Another point is that I can't remember if I read one example of a serious game that is not e-learning or gamified e-learning tool. So this is not a serious game, it's gamification of e-learning tools. Because all of our examples are found, or we have found outside, for exception for the e-learning tool. For example, 2. So there might be a reason for that, in that when you want a gamification, the field of gamification seems to be much larger, so they have more to go on, and that might be also more closely related to research. While serious games for training, you don't go to a research company to figure out how to do that. You go to a game company to develop that, and that might be the big difference.
And that final, what upset me a little bit is that, so the title says, in the corporate training environment. And when they talk about papers, they say, we exclude all K-12 papers. Who would thought that that would be in the corporate environment? K-12, that's kindergarten to 12th grade. And I wouldn't expect it to be in the corporate training.
That's a good pick.
But that doesn't make it this a big point. Oh, we exclude all K-12 papers. Okay, so corporate kids, I thought kids workers were allowed, so.
Well, there's probably a bit of cultural flexibility here embedded in the paper. But, there's considerable shortcomings, right? One of the notable ones, the nice part is, last week we had a paper that was fairly good at all those things, right? So in there it was very dated. There was a counterexample, right? So it was kind of mirroring, because it has this nice tabular approach, decomposing the structure. It has shortcomings as well. For example, it doesn't contain the breakdown table for the filtering. But it was very explicit about criteria nevertheless. But it has really extensive listing of tables, right? As opposed to just putting the references here. But in addition to that, so assuming you can't do the tables for whatever reasons, I don't know, what would be an alternative she could have undertaken with this paper? So if
presenting the same theme, you mean, or?
No, so an alternative to what has been done here, meaning basically having a lot of papers and then, mixing, narratives from here and there to develop something that's readable.
A better way of summarizing all the actual products, because again, when you look at the corporate world, you want to look at a product, and maybe try to bring in and bring in some numbers to say how, for each product, you want to see if there is any common metrics you can use. So for instance, training time, is that reduced?
Awesome.
Do you see, is there a trend for reduction of time, or is there a trend for increase of productivity, or is there customer satisfaction? Maybe looking into each example, because now it's mostly just quoting other papers.
That's one way. Yep. Yes. So that would be, but we would refine the paper more specifically, right? But in those cases, you can actually go down the route, and I believe, even though I call it literature review, to make more or less a narrative review. right? Where you actually cherry pick, because that's what's happening anyway here. Cherry pick papers from a given domain, and then kind of cluster around those domains, and then share the findings of that domain. My suspicion is that the reader got slightly confused by the complexity of the issue encountered, right? So it's too many dimensions, even drawing the map would leave you with too many features, simply to provide a meaningful structure. And in those cases, you kind of need to decompose simply, and that could be hard cuts by saying, I'm looking at emergency services, I'm looking at onboarding training, I don't know. So in a different kind of patterns to kind of structure the paper more, and then develop this narrative around it, a storyline, right? So, or, as you said, develop a storyline about real-world metrics, right? So then to identify where things were effective, where not, instead of jumping around too spottily as done in many respects in this paper. So, yeah, I mean, in essence, what we can learn, I believe, from the paper are only very high-level things that we can learn elsewhere as well. For example, in other papers, but also in cultural studies, for example, because we know that from organizational theory that people are change resistant. We also know that different age groups have different learner behavior, more generally, irrespective of serious games. So it's quite a bit of opportunity for improvement. What it gives you, however, and that's good for you, is a set of references you can use yourself in order to, improve this.
That's the other item to pick up on, is that just done a lot of research to find all the various papers that are interesting, so go and read those. Exactly. And that can in many respects be a good purpose of survey papers, right? Or sometimes called overview papers, if they actually don't survey, meaning they don't construct a structure of the field, but only list, like in summary style, more or less the papers that they're capturing. They are still good source for you to exploit, right? So it basically cuts the Google search for you short. But bear in mind, the search methodology may be flawed as well, right? And that was an issue here. However, no one expects you to write a survey paper in the first place, so you can still use it to kind of, scout for interesting examples there, right? What would be interesting would really perhaps look at metrics, perhaps to emphasize on the recent work, because that will be more, I mean, training is something that I feel would be, if you want to learn something about it, it needs to be reasonably contemporarily embedded, right? If you want to tell the next company as a consultant how to or not use serious games, it's probably sensible to emphasize recent efforts. Not saying that you ignore older work, but be more mindful about this, because technology moves, fast, relatively speaking. But also there's a bit more of a legacy that other, articles can build on, experiences and so on. Please.
On that note, and it was
Yep.
brought up that if you're contracting a design consultancy to make your onboarding product, then are they really going to publish a research paper on it? Probably not. They're going to hand over the product to you and you pay them.
That's right. Yeah. But as far as presentable, right? So I mean, there are some citations from 2017 and so on. I think those are referable to 2018. So that's quite recent stuff. But of course, that's the thing. I think that's a fundamental challenge that you have with your topic. Is a lot of this is governed, by IP, and it's just part of the trade secret or business secret, whatever, of the company. So it makes it challenging. But there's still abundance of different training examples out there, and there can also be you found some that are evidently protected by IP, but nevertheless you get out some information about it. But it would be good to find perhaps studies that use any of those, right? And then claim something about productivity increase or not, right? So it'd be nice if you find some reference to that, the use of existing simulations pads. That may be an angle, especially if they're published. For example, the war combat one, right? I mean, it has been around for 13 years. I would be surprised if there's nothing published on its efficiency in training in the context of warfare, because you don't need to talk necessarily about detailed scenarios, which would, of course, reveal.
I think their one selling metrics for DBS is that they can claim that 95% of NATO are using it.
Yeah.
And there's also another example. McDonald's have been using this company called Eon Reality to create a training simulator for how to operate various machines in their kitchen area. and there's definitely no research papers on it, but what I gather from it is that they don't, training can be done locally, and that's equally valuable. But what I found is that, or what they wanted, is to reduce the amount of training staff. So instead of having one training staff going around in an area,
Right.
they have one like nationwide person, which they connect up with trainees, like once or twice or sometime, but they use it via VR.
Perfect.
And so it's not about training efficiency; it's about cost reduction.
But I agree. I would say that first of all those two correlate, and I still argue it's about cost reduction, but the objectives are different, right? On the one hand, the cost reduction could lie on making the onboarding, for example, the new employee more efficient, but the cost reduction could also lie in simply avoiding having an additional manager, right? Making the hierarchy a bit more lean. So the training objectives would be interesting to discuss, right? As guiding your analysis, right? If you want to look into efficiency metrics for a particular training solution, you want to see what are the training objectives in the first place. In your case, it's to get rid of the middleman, right? Or reduce basically that idea. So that's important to pick up on. I think it's a very good find. And I think that's where you could use this also as a possible way of clustering different forms of training simulations, right? What are the actual objectives, right? You know, which side are you focusing? Are you actually looking at the trainees or the trainers in this particular example, right? So, or the company more general or whatever. So this could be probably more promising avenue of structuring for a paper discussions, especially if the area is so diverse and confused. But very nice point you picked up on. That's a very good one.
I want to tell about the quality of the paper. It's maybe because of the, for example, students or someone were forced to publish a paper. For example, for a fact, I know in South Korea, my friends studying master's degree, and they are forced to publish international paper, one international paper, to graduate from the master's degree.
This is wrong, but we should do that as well. So, shouldn't we? Just to be on the wrong side of the fence, because I think Rune and I have or had frequent discussion about this area. What was the Michael Stonebreaker called it? Paper diarrhea, I believe.
Yeah.
So, so it's basically just putting a paper out for putting a paper out, not even to have any substantive. You know, you're just producing noise, because now when you use this thing, it just makes the Google search harder, because you need to filter out through all those rather diuretic papers before you get to something meaningful. Yeah, we're probably not going to do that. However, if you have something substantive to contribute to the research community and the discourse, then we of course encourage it. But no, that's a risk. But coming back to the paper, I agree with you. I suspect this could be an early PhD student doing a survey paper of the field.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon.
Quite sure it is.
There you go. So that's the classical approach they undertake there. Okay, thank you very much for providing us with this opportunity to destroy yet another paper. But also give us a bit of an insight into training and the different challenges underlie. I think you got a lot of feedback, I think, for your respective reviews. So there's a lot of opportunities and pathways you can go down. So try to use them. Cool. And thank you to Caroline for participating remotely, which is always a challenge, we know. Whose turn is it next week? There you go. Topic?
Game analysis.
Game analysis. Good. Would be good for the specific paper to have a more specific paper, as in a paper that actually breaks down a game analysis. It takes an instance of a game and analyzes it, if possible, right? So, or does some sort of evaluation on it. That's what I would see the primary focus on the specific papers, to actually look at specific instances and that come up with metrics and so on, so we can scrutinize methodology more. We have seen quite a number of survey papers in the meantime, so we think we're kind of good on those for now. But in certain areas, they just lend themselves very well for presentation, because the areas are so confused and large. There's no discussion about it. So if possible, that would be great. Cool. Well, thank you very much for your patience. It's 2 o'clock. I'm surprised no one ran out or jumped out the window or otherwise. So thank you very much for your attention, and we see you next week. Yes. Yeah.